Hi, my name is Rowena, and 8 years ago, my husband threw me out in the rain, pregnant, broke, with nothing but a $20 bill and the echo of a slammed door. He told me I was a mistake, that our children would ruin his future. Yesterday, he invited me to his wedding, not out of kindness, but to humiliate me, all over again. What he didn't know is that I wouldn't be walking in alone. So before we begin, tell me, what would you do if the man who ruined your life handed you the mic in front of everyone who once looked the other way? Because I took it. And I didn't whisper. Now, the whole room knows. Want to hear what I said? The envelope was thick, heavy in my hands, like it carried more than just paper. My name was written in a bold script that I knew all too well, even after 8 years. Silas. For a moment, I just sat there at the kitchen table, staring at it as the late afternoon sun bled through the blinds, striping the room in gold and shadow. My twins were in the living room, their laughter spilling over the sound of a cartoon on TV. That sound grounded me, because what I held in my hand threatened to pull me back to a place I had sworn I'd never return to. When I tore it open, I felt like I was peeling back a scar that had only just managed to close. Inside was a wedding invitation, formal, embossed, pretentious. My throat went dry as I read his name paired with hers. Beneath the printed lines was a handwritten note, careless in its cruelty. Hope you've moved on. Would love for you to see what happiness looks like. I sat, frozen. My fingers trembled, not from love lost, but from the memory of that night. The night he shoved me out into the cold Texas rain, pregnant and crying, with nothing but $20 crumpled in my pocket. I remember standing under the streetlight, clutching my belly, whispering to the life inside me that somehow, we'd survive. I was nothing then. At least that's what he made me believe. But I'm not her anymore. The walls of this house are mine. The mortgage, the business, the life I built, it's mine. And in the living room sat 2 bright-eyed 7-year-olds, the same mistakes he said would ruin his life. Mistakes that turned out to be my salvation. Still, that note, it sliced right through the armor I thought I'd grown. He wasn't reaching out. He wasn't curious about the children he discarded. This was theater. He wanted me to watch him play the role of a happy groom, to see me flinch. I should have thrown the card into the trash. I even stood by the bin, invitation dangling from my hand, my chest tight with the urge to rip it into shreds. But then the details caught my eye. The wedding was being held at Barton Creek Country Club, the same place where, years ago, he'd paraded me like a failure in front of our friends when the divorce became public. I could still hear the laughter of his buddies, the way he toasted to new beginnings while I stood humiliated at the bar. That wasn't coincidence. That was deliberate. I set the invitation down and pressed my palms to the table. A slow, sick heat spread through me. He'd chosen the one place loaded with shame, knowing exactly what memory it would dig up. But as I stared at the gold lettering, something shifted. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was clarity. He wanted to frame me in his story as the ghost of his past, the broken ex-wife who'd never rise again. Later that night, after the twins were tucked in, my best friend Margot dropped by. She spotted the invitation on the counter and let out a whistle. "Ro, tell me you're not even considering this," she said, tossing her coat over a chair. "He's baiting you. Don't give him the satisfaction." "I know," I murmured, staring into my cup of tea. "It's a trap." "Then throw it out." I didn't answer. Because even as she said it, I couldn't. Something about this was pulling at me. Not to seek revenge, not yet, but to prove to myself I wasn't the woman he thought he could humiliate. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I called the country club under the pretense of confirming attendance. The woman at the desk shuffled papers, put me on hold, and then returned with words that made my skin prickle. I don't see your name on the guest list, ma'am, but you're listed under the evening program. Says here, special entertainment segment. My grip on the phone tightened. Entertainment. My stomach turned as I realized what he had done. He hadn't invited me as a guest. He had staged me as part of a spectacle. A joke. I hung up without a word. My reflection stared back at me from the kitchen window, the woman I was, the woman he thought I still was, and the woman I needed to be. For a moment, the humiliation burned hot and deep, like it did all those years ago. But beneath it, something steadier stirred. If Silas wanted a performance, I'd give him one he'd never forget. I stood in my bedroom, the silence pressing in like cotton against my skin. The invitation sat on my nightstand, unopened again, though I knew every word it held. If he wanted a performance, I'd give him one he'd never forget. But I wouldn't do it out of rage. No, I was past that. This was about something deeper, about reclaiming the version of myself he'd tried to erase. I pulled down the old box from the top shelf of my closet, dust slipping off the lid like old memories. Inside it lay the dress, ivory silk, a designer label, still nestled in the same tissue paper from a decade ago. Silas had bought it for me during our brief golden period, when he was still pretending to love me, before the controlling whispers began, before the "you're lucky I'm with you" started poisoning every compliment. He never let me wear it, said it was too much for someone like me. I didn't fight back then. I remember nodding, folding the dress back into its tissue like I agreed. Now, I slipped it on. It clung in all the right places, smooth over my hips, soft against my back. I turned slowly in the mirror, studying myself, not with vanity, but with recognition. This wasn't just a dress, it was a declaration. "You didn't break me," I whispered. In the hallway, the twins were giggling over something on the tablet. I stepped out, still barefoot, and they both looked up. My daughter's eyes widened. "Mom, you look like a hero." I blinked. It was such a simple thing for a 7-year-old to say, but it cracked something open in me. I smiled and kissed the top of her head. "Thank you, baby. I've got an event this weekend, that's all." She nodded seriously, then ran off like she'd just handed me a crown. That night, after they'd gone to bed, I found myself in the bathroom, lights off, door shut, just sitting on the cold tile floor. I didn't cry. Not really. I just let myself feel how tired I was, of carrying silence, of playing polite while people rewrote the truth. I'd built a business, a life, a home, but I'd never cleaned out the corners where the old stories still lived. The next morning, I went to the salon on Congress Avenue. It was a last-minute decision. Maybe I needed a fresh look, or maybe I just needed to sit still while someone else did the work for once. I was flipping through a magazine when I heard 2 women at the sink behind me. "Are you going to Silas Kavanaugh's wedding? I heard it's going to be massive. He finally moved on from that drama queen ex." "Oh, I heard she lied about being pregnant, trapped him, then bailed." I didn't move. My fingers tightened on the page. Their voices kept going, tossing around details like confetti. "She faked it all, girl. Took off with his money. He's lucky he got out." I closed the magazine. My stylist caught my eye in the mirror, hesitant. "You okay?" she asked softly. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just realized I've heard this story before, but the ending's all wrong." I left before they could notice me. Walked out into the street, the Texas heat thick like syrup, and sat in my car with the engine off. I wasn't surprised. Not really. Silas always had a way of making himself the victim in any story, but hearing strangers repeat his lies like gospel, it dug deeper than I expected. Later that day, a plain white envelope was slid under my door. No return address, no stamps, just my name in block letters. I opened it cautiously. Inside were photographs. Candid shots of me walking into my store, playing with the twins at the park, even coming out of the courthouse where I'd recently filed for business expansion. My heart jumped into my throat. Attached was a typed note. He's been watching for months. This was never about moving on. I read it twice, then again. Someone had hired a private investigator, and I wasn't the one doing the hiring. Silas knew. He knew about the life I'd built, the success, the quiet progress I'd made. He hadn't stumbled across my name in a registry or gotten sentimental about the past. He'd baited me. This wedding, this invitation, it wasn't closure. It was a performance of dominance. He wanted to control the narrative. Again. I sat down at the kitchen table, the envelope and photos spread before me. My hand trembled, but not with fear, with focus. My mind went still in a way that felt almost sacred. I wasn't going to lash out. Not yet. This was a game now, and I had just been dealt his playbook. He thinks I'm still the same girl he left in the rain. He's wrong. This time, I'm bringing a storm. I didn't sleep much after those photos. I just sat by the window sipping cold tea, watching the porch light flicker like a bad memory trying to stay alive. Silence stretched across the walls, same way it did that night. 8 years ago, I stood on the edge of the same kind of quiet. Back then, I was 5 months pregnant, standing in our San Marcos kitchen with swollen ankles and a heart cracked wide open. Silas had just signed some fancy real estate deal and walked in like he owned half of Texas. I thought he'd be happy, like maybe we'd finally settle into something soft. But the minute I brought up a baby name I liked, he rolled his eyes. "Ro, this pregnancy, it's making you unpredictable. I can't have you around my partners like this." I thought I misheard him. "I'm carrying our child," I said, still holding the baby name book I'd marked up with little sticky notes. He didn't look at me. "I gave you a choice. You knew that. You could have ended it." "We talked about this." "No," I whispered. "You talked. I never agreed." He finally met my eyes then, but there was no warmth in them, just calculation. "Then you leave. Tonight, I'll give you $20 and a ride to the bus station. That's the best I can do." I didn't cry, not in front of him. I packed a duffel bag with what I could, 2 dresses, a toothbrush, and the ultrasound photo I kept hidden in a book spine. I zipped it up slow, as if dragging out those final seconds might change his mind. He didn't flinch. It was pouring by the time I stepped outside. Not a soft drizzle, but the kind of downpour that soaks through socks before you even find shelter. He didn't offer an umbrella, just closed the door behind me. The rain mixed with the blur in my vision as I made my way down the sidewalk. My sister lived a few blocks over. She'd helped us move in once. Surely she'd help me now. I knocked on her door, shivering, duffel clutched tight like a life raft. When she opened the door and saw me, her expression didn't even shift. "Oh, Rowena," she sighed. "What did you do this time?" I stood there dumbfounded. "He kicked me out. I have nowhere to go." She crossed her arms, voice dropping to that cold tone she saved for her worst judgments. "You always stir things up. You never listen. Why are you dragging a baby into this mess?" I begged her. Honest to God, I begged. But she wouldn't even let me inside. Said I was toxic and needed to get my act together. That slammed door hit harder than Silas's ever did, so I turned to the only other option, my mother's place, about 20 minutes out in the hill country. I walked to the gas station and used the payphone. It rang 5 times before she picked up. Her voice was flat from the start. "Silas already called me." My stomach turned. "Called you? About what?" "He told me everything. That you cheated. That the baby isn't his. That you're trying to trap him." "I raised you better, Rowena. Don't come here." Click. I held the phone to my ear long after the dial tone started. That moment right there, when your own mother believes the man who discarded you over the daughter she raised. It does something to you. It rewires your bones. I walked for hours after that, shoes squishing, hair plastered, lungs burning. It was somewhere near the edge of town that headlights pulled up beside me. "Hey, you okay?" It was a teenager, maybe 16. Auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail, braces glinting when she smiled. I didn't recognize her, but she looked at me like I was human, not a problem to be solved or a story to twist. "I live next door to Silas," she said. "I saw you leave. You looked not okay. My name's Harper. Do you need a ride somewhere safe?" I don't even remember nodding, just sliding into the passenger seat, water dripping everywhere, the heat from her vents feeling like grace. She drove me to a small Methodist church on the far side of town. "My grandma says they help people who need a restart. You don't have to explain anything," she added gently. Not to me. And I didn't. Not then. But I never forgot her. The church let me stay in a back room for 2 weeks. After that, I found a women's shelter in Austin that helped me get on my feet. They helped me find a job, an apartment. They helped me become the woman I am now. But it all started with a girl in a beat-up Honda who didn't ask for an explanation, just offered warmth. I've told that story to myself so many times it's like a lullaby. Not to wallow, but to remember. Not all betrayals are loud. Sometimes they whisper through closed doors and judgmental stares. And sometimes salvation shows up in the form of a teenager with a bad playlist and too many questions. Last week, during a board meeting at the nonprofit I help fund, a young woman presented a community outreach proposal. Her name badge read Harper Lane. Her voice was strong, her ideas better. She didn't recognize me, and I didn't say a word. Not yet. But as I watched her speak, I felt something rise in me I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. I never thought I'd see Harper again, but fate always knows how to close a circle. By the time I pulled into the valet line at the Crescent Hotel, the sun had dipped behind the skyline and left a thin blush across the Dallas sky. The city felt too clean, too manicured, like it was trying too hard to impress. Just like Silas. The rehearsal dinner was held in one of those over-the-top private ballrooms, white roses spilling off gold-plated centerpieces, waiters in tuxedos offering glasses of Prosecco before I'd even crossed the threshold. No one asked for my name. I walked in like I belonged. That's the trick. People rarely question confidence when it's worn like armor. I caught sight of Silas before he saw me. He was working the room, leaning in close to whisper something in a man's ear, clapping someone else on the shoulder, always flashing that fake politician's grin he'd perfected years ago. Colleen stood at his side like a trophy, tall, slim, polished within an inch of her soul. She wore a dress that probably cost more than my rent in grad school, and her earrings looked like they came with their own security detail. She noticed me first. Her smile held, but her eyes twitched, just the smallest flicker of confusion that curdled into recognition. She whispered something to Silas, and that's when his whole body stilled. I didn't flinch. He approached like a man walking through fog, unsure whether he was seeing a ghost or a problem. "Rowena," he said, voice smooth, volume pitched for an audience. "Didn't expect you here." "I'm full of surprises," I replied. He laughed, loud and empty, glancing around to make sure others heard. "Everyone, this is Rowena. We were briefly married, long ago." She couldn't quite keep up. A few people chuckled politely. One man coughed awkwardly into his drink. I just smiled, cool and still. The words didn't sting. Not anymore. Not when I was standing there in the same room he tried to keep me out of, wearing confidence like perfume. Not when I knew exactly what he'd built this entire event on: lies, image, fragile control. I made my way to the charity auction table. Items were arranged with little placards, spa packages, signed footballs, even a weekend at some vineyard in Napa. At the end of the row sat a plain clipboard, the donation pledge sheet. I picked up the pen, signed my name with deliberate care, and wrote down the figure, $250,000. Underneath, I added, "On behalf of the Harper Lee Foundation." No theatrics, no announcement. I set the clipboard down and walked away. It took about 15 minutes before the whispers started. Silas's head snapped toward the table like he'd smelled smoke. Colleen leaned in, reading the name out loud, eyebrows climbing so high I thought they'd disappear into her hairline. A few guests looked over at me, blinking, recalibrating. The girl he mocked. The one who couldn't keep up? She just outbid every guest in the room. I sipped my drink slowly, letting the quiet spread like ink in water. Later, during the toasts, Silas took the mic. I knew that voice too well. Every rise and fall, every pause calibrated for maximum effect. He told a story about meeting Colleen, how she brought stability and focus to his life, how she helped correct the mistakes of his past. Then he looked right at me. Some people, he said, smiling faintly, are just that, mistakes. But the good thing about mistakes is they can be corrected. Applause. Laughter. I didn't blink, didn't frown, didn't touch my glass. But inside, a new vow was written across my chest like ink on skin. He will never call my children that again. Not in public, not in private, not ever. They laughed with him tonight, but soon they'd see who the real mistake was. I barely slept. The luxury suite Silas reserved for my twins and me, though under the guise of accommodating family, felt more like a stage prop than a place to rest. White linens, designer soaps, espresso machine I didn't touch. It all screamed curated, performative, just like him. Morning arrived quietly, the kind that carries a weight you can feel in your chest. The sun filtered in through half-drawn curtains, and for a moment I watched the city breathe through glass. Dallas always feels like it's trying to prove something. I sat at the vanity, still in my robe, staring at my reflection. My dress hung by the door, pressed, tailored, intentional. A deep navy satin, structured and elegant, a color that meant business without screaming for attention. The version of me from 8 years ago wouldn't have dared wear something like that. She wouldn't have believed she deserved to. A knock came at the connecting room. Soft, rhythmic. My son. Mom, do we really have to go today? I opened the door and knelt down. Just breakfast and the ceremony. We'll be home by dinner. But why are we even here? My daughter chimed in from behind him. He doesn't even like us. I breathed in slowly. It's not about him. It's about us being seen. Not fighting. Just present. They nodded, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They'd seen too much for their age, but they'd never seen me quit. As they returned to their room to get ready, I finally stood and stepped into my dress. Zipping it up felt like sealing something away, like the past was being folded into the fabric. I stared at myself again. The makeup was subtle, the hair pinned clean, but it was the eyes that gave me away. Tired, but steady. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, thumb hovering, then tapped it open. He's planning something. Don't let him win again. Attached was a photo, blurry, taken from the side. Silas was laughing, holding a sheet of paper in one hand, Mike in the other. The caption below, reception speech rehearsal. Final joke. Eviction notice reveal. I stood motionless, reading it twice, then 3 more times. My stomach didn't drop. My hands didn't shake. Instead, everything inside me went quiet. There's a difference between rage and resolve. I wasn't mad. I was done. Another message followed seconds later. It's Harper. I work with your nonprofit now. I didn't know until I saw your name on the donor list. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I overheard him last night. Couldn't stay quiet. Harper. I remembered the girl who had once driven me to a church shelter without even asking why I was crying. She was 17 then, maybe. Kind, a little scared, but brave enough to do what grown men hadn't. Now she was grown, and she remembered. My hands lowered, phone still glowing in my palm. I walked to the bathroom and stood at the mirror again. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It never was. It was about the woman he left in the rain and the 2 kids sleeping in the next room. It was about every time I bit my tongue to protect them, every time I stayed silent to avoid being called bitter or unstable. "Mom," my daughter called again, cracking the door. "We're ready. You look like you're going to war." I smiled. "No, just walking into the fire with my head high." She grinned. "Same thing." We made our way downstairs slowly, through the elevator, past strangers in cocktail attire and too much cologne. No one looked directly at me. That's the funny thing about these events. People only look once they're told who matters. And today I decided I mattered. I hadn't come to beg. I hadn't come to warn. I'd come because standing there was louder than anything I could have said. Chai, if he thought I would stand there and be his punchline again, he'd learn just how wrong he was. We arrived deliberately late, not enough to interrupt, just enough that heads turned as the ballroom doors swung open and the string quartet faltered mid-measure. The twins walked in beside me, matching navy suits and polished shoes, their small hands clutching mine like anchors. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Every camera in the room shifted. Every whisper tilted in our direction. Silas saw me before I saw him. The smirk that had stretched so easily across his face when the ceremony began now twitched, just slightly. I watched his eyes skim over the kids, then settle on me, and pause, longer than expected. The fake warmth in his face cooled a degree. And that was enough. We took our seats near the back, where uninvited family usually lingered. No one dared question our presence, not with the calm assurance I carried or the quiet glances I returned. Money buys you silence, but dignity, that earns you stares. The ceremony resumed, vows rehearsed to perfection, smiles more polished than sincere. Silas held Colleen's hands like he meant it, but the words he chose, they were for me. I stand here today to start fresh, to build something pure, not from mistakes, but from promise. People clapped, but some looked sideways at me, a few too long. Colleen followed suit with her own blade wrapped in satin. We're building a life rooted in truth, free of burdens and without the weight of anyone else's leftovers. I didn't flinch, not even a blink. Instead, I leaned toward my son and whispered, "Let them talk. Talking is all they know." He smiled, like he already knew. After the vows, while photographers gathered guests in clusters like ornaments for the perfect wedding reel, I excused myself under the guise of fresh air and instead made my way toward the guest book table. The event planner stood nearby, clipboard in hand, glancing over the donation cards laid out for the charity auction. I picked up the silver pen, signed my name, full name, in clear script, and paused just long enough for her to see it. "Rowena K. Moreland," I said. "Benefactor." Her brows lifted. "Wait, you're the Rowena?" "I am." She read the donation slip and blinked. That's more than the entire event total." I smiled softly. "That's the point." Her voice shot through the murmuring room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to thank our highest benefactor, Ms. Rowena Moreland, for her incredibly generous contribution. This wedding just became our most successful fundraiser to date." A round of applause followed. Not loud, but enough to tilt the room's energy. I didn't turn to see Silas's reaction. I didn't need to. Afterward, I slipped away to the powder room, not to retreat, just to breathe. The silence inside felt honest. For a second, I let myself look in the mirror, not to fix anything, but to remind myself of who I was walking out as. And that's when the door opened behind me. Colleen. Her heels clicked too fast across the tile. Her reflection appeared beside mine, eyes full of poison and insecurity. "You really can't help yourself, can you?" I turned slowly, calm as still water. You weren't even supposed to be here, she hissed. I kept my hands folded. And yet, here I am. She stepped closer. You think writing a check makes you important? You'll always be what he left behind. Trash. I let the insult hang in the air for a moment. Then, softly, without a single edge in my voice, I said, Funny. Trash doesn't usually fly private. Her mouth twitched. She opened it like she might fire back, but nothing came. I walked past her without another glance. Let her stew. Let the words settle in the same way she tried to settle into a life built on someone else's ruins. Back in the ballroom, I found the twins sitting quietly, plates untouched. My daughter looked up at me with pride that needed no explanation. You okay? She asked. I am, I said. I've never been better. Guests glanced at me differently now, some with curiosity, others with awkward guilt, but not one with pity. And that mattered more than anything, because today, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I didn't play the game. I changed the rules. But Silas wasn't done yet, and neither was I. The ballroom shimmered with all the overcompensated grandeur he could afford. Gold-trimmed linens, monogrammed napkins, a live band softly playing some overused Sinatra cover. It was the kind of reception meant to scream, "We made it." But underneath the sparkle, I could feel it unraveling. He'd seen it in the way guests leaned closer to whisper when I passed, in the raised brows and not-so-subtle glances toward the twins. My presence wasn't loud, but it was disruptive, and that unnerved him more than if I had thrown a drink in his face. By the time dinner plates were cleared and champagne glasses refilled, the energy had shifted. He felt it too. I could tell by the way his smile turned rigid, his gestures exaggerated, trying to reclaim the spotlight. Desperate men always overplay their hand, and he was about to. Silas stood and tapped the side of a crystal flute. If I may, he began, his voice oily smooth, I'd like to offer a little toast to new beginnings, and to lessons learned. People clinked glasses, murmured politely. The projector screen behind him came to life. The first image popped up, an old eviction notice with my name on it, dated and crumpled but legible. Then came a photo of me, visibly pregnant, standing outside a cheap motel with a grocery bag in hand. Another followed, my beat-up sedan parked outside a 24-hour laundromat, more flashes of a life I thought had been buried with dignity, now served like appetizers to a crowd eager for entertainment. He smiled at the audience, like a magician revealing his best trick. We all have a past, right? He chuckled. Some just come with more baggage. A few laughed, nervous, unsure. Most didn't. The air thickened. Eyes darted toward me, waiting, expecting tears, a scene, maybe a storm out. Instead, I stood. I didn't touch the microphone, didn't walk to the front. Just raised my glass, calm as ever, voice clear but soft enough that the room had to quiet to hear. Funny, I said. Those are the same years I was carrying the legacy you abandoned. Silence. I turned slightly toward the back of the room where my twins sat, poised, polished, in tailored suits. Would you like to see what became of that so-called mistake? The boys stood as if on cue, tall and still, the spitting image of their father, only stronger where he had turned bitter, more graceful where he had become cruel. The entire room stilled. Even the band stopped mid-chord. You could hear ice settle in the champagne. I didn't need to add a word. I sat back down. Let them look. Let them see the truth without me spoon-feeding it. Silas's face, once smug, now twitched with something close to panic. Not because I'd shouted, but because I hadn't. Colleen gripped his arm with fingers so tight her knuckles turned white. She whispered something to him, but he didn't move. He couldn't. The man who had spent years erasing me was now being rewritten by the very proof he had left behind. People began murmuring. Not the same whispers from earlier. These carried weight. I caught pieces. Those are her kids? They look just like him. She never said a word. A woman at the next table leaned over. That was graceful, she said quietly, almost in awe. I smiled. That was the truth. The rest of the evening moved on like nothing had happened, at least on the surface. But I knew better. The whole narrative he'd spent years weaving had come undone in under a minute. Not because I fought dirty, but because I didn't have to fight at all. The twins returned to their seats. My daughter leaned in and whispered, "That was kind of awesome." I chuckled. "You think so?" She nodded. "You looked like a queen." That's all I needed. Let Silas fumble his way through the rest of the evening. Let the expensive cake be cut, the first dance swayed, the photographer snap what was left of a perfect illusion. I had already given the guests the real story, one they wouldn't forget by dessert. Because truth doesn't need a spotlight, it just needs a moment. But Silas wasn't finished. And neither was fate. The ballroom had started to dim into evening softness. Candles flickered. The band shifted to something slower, smoother. On the surface, everything still sparkled, but I could feel the shift. The energy had changed. Whispers chased me as I moved through the crowd. Not the malicious kind, not anymore. Curious, respectful, uneasy. Colleen hadn't made eye contact since the restroom. Her jaw clenched every time someone nodded in my direction. She kept adjusting her diamond bracelet like it was slipping. It wasn't. She was unraveling. I was standing near the back, sipping water, when I saw Silas step back onto the stage again. My stomach didn't drop this time. I already knew something was coming. You don't give a man like him a bruise to the ego and expect him to sit still. He held up a folder, crisp manila, all too rehearsed, and gave the crowd a mock, humble smile. "I wasn't going to say anything," he began, already lying, "but in light of some misleading impressions floating around tonight, I feel it's important to clarify a few things." He opened the folder and held up a set of printed documents. "These are from a few years back. Corporate records. Some of you know I co-founded Ridgewell Holdings. What most of you don't know," he paused, savoring it, "is that someone here siphoned funds from that company, quietly, repeatedly, until we nearly folded." He held the papers up higher, as if displaying evidence in court. "Rowena Whitmore, my ex, she embezzled over $75,000, used it to, let's say, rebuild her life." Gasps this time. Audible ones. I even saw someone put a hand over their mouth. He looked directly at me. "She didn't earn her comeback. She stole it." I didn't blink. Let him hang himself. I walked slowly, not rushed, not shaken, to the side of the stage where the event coordinator stood. I tapped her shoulder, murmured something. She handed me the reception mic. I didn't look at Silas when I took the stage. I looked at the crowd, at their wide eyes, their tilted heads. Even the waitstaff had stopped. I held the microphone gently, then lifted my other hand, not to accuse, but to present. From my purse, I pulled out my own folder. Thicker, original pages, yellowed at the edges, notarized in blue ink. "I wasn't going to say anything either," I said quietly, "but since we're sharing stories..." I flipped open the file. "These are the initial capital agreements from Ridgewell Holdings, the ones filed before the company ever existed. You'll notice the first check was from the Whitmore estate." I turned the page slowly, showing the signature. "My family's money, my inheritance." Murmurs again, louder now. "Silas didn't have the cash to start Ridgewell. I did. And I gave it to him without a contract because I believed in him." I turned another page. "Here's the bank transfer, the full amount, not to his name, to the business, because I wasn't trying to steal anything. I was building a future." The crowd shifted. You could feel it, the sympathy draining from him like air from a punctured tire. And this, I said, holding up the page he had brandished, is a forgery. You'll notice the font doesn't match the company letterhead from that year. The logo? That was updated in 2021. This document claims to be from 2018. A man in a suit near the bar leaned forward. She's right. I do the print work for Ridgewell. That's not the old template. Silas's face froze. I continued. He didn't just lie about me. He lied about the very thing he built his reputation on. And he thought I'd stay silent. Again. I handed the mic back to the coordinator. And then, just for punctuation, I walked off the stage and straight toward my children. They didn't say a word. They didn't need to. My son took my hand. My daughter squared her shoulders beside me. Colleen stood in the far corner. Her mouth was open, but no words came out. Her gaze darted to Silas, then to the guests, now avoiding eye contact with both of them. She looked like someone who had just realized her castle was built on rotted wood. As I turned, the crowd parted. No one stopped me. No one called my name. But I could feel the room shifting, eyes wide, minds racing. Some people nodded. Others just stared. And behind me I heard it. Not applause, not a cheer. Just the band slowly starting up again. This time playing something somber and slow, like a funeral march dressed in lace. And when the music stopped, the wedding wasn't just over. It was finished. The last note faded like breath on glass. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, their conversations reduced to murmurs and sideways glances. Some were already slipping out, grabbing their coats and dodging eye contact. Others lingered out of sheer curiosity, like rubberneckers at a wreck they didn't want to admit they were part of. Silas stood alone near the stage, shoulders drawn up, like a man waiting for a punch that never lands, except this one already had, over and over. The suit that once screamed confidence now looked like armor left on too long, heavy and ill-fitting. He muttered something to a man I didn't recognize, maybe trying to explain, maybe still clinging to the idea he could spin the truth into something else, but it was too late. Colleen stood by the champagne tower, her veil clutched in one fist, not worn, just hanging, like a white flag. She looked at Silas, at the people avoiding him, then back at me. Our eyes met briefly. No hatred, no rage, just the dull, blank look of someone who realized the fairy tale was staged with counterfeit props. She turned on her heel and walked straight out of the ballroom. The veil slipped from her hand and fluttered to the floor. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I didn't say a word. Instead, I turned to my children. They were quiet, as they'd been all evening, but not out of fear. There was something steadier now in the way they stood beside me. They didn't flinch when people stared. They didn't look to me for answers. They just held my hands like they had all along, like we'd practiced for this moment without knowing. "Let's go," I said softly. We walked through the same grand entrance I'd once left 8 years ago. In tears, in shame, in silence. Tonight, we left the same way. Silent. But not because we were broken. Because we didn't owe anyone another word. Outside, the night air was cooler than I remembered. A breeze brushed past like an old friend. I let it run across my shoulders, cleansing. We were halfway down the front steps of the hotel when a voice called out behind me, "Rowena?" I turned, and for a moment I didn't recognize her. She had grown, her frame taller, more poised, but the eyes were the same, soft, searching. It was Harper. She stepped forward, hesitant but certain. Her hands were clasped tight in front of her like she didn't quite know what to do with them. I didn't want to interrupt," she said. "I just needed to say thank you." I nodded, giving her space. "I was that girl," she went on. "That rainy night, the one with the black eye and no shoes. You helped me when no one else would." My throat tightened, not from pain, From the quiet, humbling gravity of the moment, she smiled faintly. Seeing you stand up there tonight, holding your ground, I didn't know how much I needed to see that. You gave me something I didn't even know I was still looking for. I stepped closer and placed a hand gently on her arm. You saved me that night too, Harper, I said. You reminded me I wasn't alone. She blinked fast and smiled again. Guess we both walked through some fire. We didn't just walk through, I said. We walked out. Harper nodded, and with that she turned and disappeared down the sidewalk. She didn't look back. I stood still for a moment, letting it all settle. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded eviction notice Silas had once used as a weapon. It was creased, worn from all the years I'd kept it. Not out of sentiment, but as a reminder. I unfolded it one last time. My name still printed at the top. My children's names handwritten in the margins. I looked at it, not with anger, but with distance, like a photo from a life that no longer belonged to me. Without fanfare, I walked to the nearest trash bin beside the valet stand. I folded the paper slowly, neatly, then dropped it in. Just paper now, not prophecy. Behind me, my son asked quietly, Mom, are we free now? I turned and smiled, not big, not flashy, just honest. We always were, I said. We just had to show the world. We kept walking, past the hedges, past the valet curb, past the last curious onlookers, and for the first time in years, I wasn't looking back, only forward.